Hello and welcome. Today I'll be talking about what I would like to see for a possible Spider-Man Homecoming sequel, and I'll also be talking about which characters I would like to see appear and be casted. With Spider-Man now officially part of the MCU, and with two appearances under his belt so far, the first one being his debut in Captain America Civil War, and just recently his solo movie Homecoming, Spider-Man is also scheduled to appear in both Avengers movies, the first one being Infinity War, which debuts next month, and the second one, which debuts next year. And it'd be quite interesting to see where Spider-Man goes from after the Avengers Infinity Wars films. So, with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about which characters I'd like to see appear. So, here is the first one I'd like to see appear and be casted. Holly Valance as Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat. Now, for many of you who are familiar with this character, Black Cat and Felicia Hardy were both a love interest to Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and she also had a big part in the animated series back in the 90s. And if they're going to bring Black Cat into the MCU, which I'm hoping they will, I'd like to see them cast Holly Valance. She's very attractive, she's got decent acting chops, and with the recent success of her fellow Australian Margot Robbie kicking up a storm as Harley Quinn, I figured this would be a great opportunity to bring in Spider-Man's love interest to the big screen. What you could do is you could bring in Felicia Hardy as a love interest and then build her up as the Black Cat, and if they do, they should definitely cast Holly Valance. Kaley as Gwen Stacy. Now, with rumours going around that Gwen Stacy could be appearing in the Homecoming sequel, I really think they should go with Kaley to play Gwen Stacy. She's funny, she's very attractive, and she can do serious. I thought she was really funny in 8 Simple Rules, which is one of my favourite TV shows of all time. She was quite serious in Charmed, and she was also quite funny in The Big Bang Theory, which she's currently a part of as we speak. So the best way they could bring Gwen Stacy into the MCU is maybe introduce her maybe halfway through the film, or maybe in an after credit scene, and then just build her up from there as Peter Parker's first true love interest. And we all know how she meets her tragic end at the hands of the Green Goblin. So it'd be quite interesting to know more about Gwen Stacy's backstory and get to spend a bit more time with her and getting to know the character a lot more as we go along. And I think Kaley Cuoco and Tom Holland could make for a very interesting pairing on screen. I think they'd have great chemistry, and I'd like to see how they would bounce off one another in terms of dialogue. So if they're going to bring Gwen Stacy, definitely cast Kaley. I think she'd be great at it. Judi Dench as Madam Web. From what I remember of Madam Web used to just randomly show up in the cartoons with cryptic messages, and she would show Peter Parker what the future could be like, what the past would be like, or show him the mistakes that he made, as well as put him through various trials and tests, all the while she was preparing him for the big eventual battle called the Secret Wars. Now, if the MCU were to go down the Secret Wars path, I'd definitely like to see Judi Dench play a big part in that. She wouldn't necessarily have to be a big part of the Spider-Man movies. She could just have a little cameo for 2 or 3 minutes. And the thought of seeing her yelling at Peter Parker about his mistakes and letting the ego get the better of him would make for some great interesting scenes, I think. And Judi Dench brings quite a lot of class to the role she plays in. I was a big fan of her work as M in the James Bond movies, so there's a quality to her already, and I'd like to see her bring more of a strict approach / motherly figure to Madam Web for Peter Parker, so I'd say they should cast her. Now, we all know that Spider-Man has quite possibly one of the most famous rogues galleries in the history of comics. I would definitely put it up there with Batman in terms of iconic. So I'm going to talk about which villains I'd like to see be appearing in this sequel and who I'd like to see be casted. So I'm going to start off with the first one, which is this guy. Bruce Greenwood as Dr. Kurt Connors, the Lizard. I wasn't a great fan of the way they handled the Lizard in the first Spider-Man movie. I didn't like the way they written Kurt Connors. He came across as a bit of a sleazeball. And Kurt Connors, from what I always remember, he wasn't a bad person. He was just obsessed with the idea of getting his arm back. So there's a bit of a tragic story there already. And we know that he has a bit of a relationship with Peter Parker in terms of being the friend / mentor / science teacher. So you got something there already. And I wasn't a fan of the way they handled Kurt Connors in the original Spider-Man films, where they just did nothing with him. So what I'd like to see for this movie is, you see throughout the film Kurt Connors is working on reptiles, and then maybe at the end he becomes a lizard and he's the main villain for the next one. And I think Bruce Greenwood would be perfect at it. He's a great actor. He was in Star Trek, he did the voice of Batman in Under the Red Hood, so he's got a bit of an impressive resume already. And I think he'd make a great Kurt Connors. So if they do decide to bring him into the MCU, they should definitely cast Bruce Greenwood. He's my pick. Billy Bob Thornton as Quentin Beck, Mysterio. Now, from what I always know of Mysterio, he was the guy who framed Spider-Man for crimes he didn't commit. And he's the master of illusion and special effects. So what they could do is, what I would like to see him do, if they decide to bring him into Spider-Man, is maybe have him be like a failed stuntman / special effects man, kind of like he was in the comics and the cartoon. And Spider-Man could interrupt one of his movies and he loses a lot of money and he blames him for that. So what he could do is maybe he could get hold of the alien technology that was left at the end of the battle between the Avengers and Loki in the first Avengers movie, and he could just start building his weaponry from there. And Billy Bob Thornton's a phenomenal actor. He's done it all, and I'd love to see him play a villain, especially in this type of movie. So if they decide to bring him in to this sequel, definitely cast him. He's perfect. Gerard Butler as Kraven the Hunter. Now, anyone who's watched his performance in 300, I thought he was just incredible. I mean, he was absolutely ripped from head to toe. And that's exactly what Kraven the Hunter is. He's a powerhouse. He's a beast. And I'd love to see him play that sort of hunter sort of role. And I'd like to see Spider-Man have a bit of a physical battle on screen. I've never really seen that in a Spider-Man movie. Also, I've been hearing rumours that Kraven the Hunter could be appearing in the Black Panther sequel. Either way, whether he appears in Black Panther or if he appears in Spider-Man, I'd definitely like to see him cast Gerard Butler. He's perfect. He's a great actor and he's got a great look, and it's too big of an opportunity to pass up. So cast him. That's all I've got to say. Ralph Fiennes as the Chameleon. Chameleon's probably my favourite Spider-Man villain of all time. He's got the ability to change into anybody just by looking at them. I know there was different versions where he used rubber masks, and in the cartoon he used a special belt which he could change his image. And I'd like to see him maybe do that in the movie. And Chameleon has very little dialogue. He's mostly silent, and he does speak a bit. But I'd like to see Ralph Fiennes tackle that role. He's a great actor. And also, you could tie this to S.H.I.E.L.D., Chameleon being an international spy, so maybe Nick Fury and Spider-Man could work together to take down the Chameleon. So that could also tie into the Avengers as well if you wanted to. And you wouldn't really have to do a lot. I mean, you've got the cast members there you can use when Chameleon changes his appearance. So I'd definitely like to see him do that take with the Chameleon, and I think Ralph Fiennes could nail it. He's perfect. So I'd go with him personally. Michael C. Hall as Cletus Cassidy, Carnage. Now, with the Venom movie coming up this year with Tom Hardy, and I'm really hoping it does well, And if it does, I'd love to see him bring Carnage into the MCU, and I'd like to see Michael C. Hall play him. I mean, anyone who's watched his performance in Dexter, he was just unbelievable. And he could bring some of that dark, twisted, sinister attitude to the serial killer approach to Cletus Cassidy, kind of similar to what he did with Dexter. Now, we know Carnage is much crazier than Venom, and I think Michael C. Hall could be really good at playing crazy. And if they do decide to cast Michael C. Hall and bring Carnage into the MCU, there's so many different ways you could go. I mean, you could have Spider-Man, Venom and Carnage going at it, or if you wanted to, you could have the two of them teaming up to take down Spider-Man. There's so many different ways you could go with Carnage. Or maybe, just maybe, we could see Carnage versus Venom. Now, personally, I think that'd be a hell of a fight to see Tom Hardy's Venom going up against Carnage, depending on who they cast, and if they do go with Michael C. Hall. So there's lots of things you can do. So if they decide to bring Carnage into the MCU, cast Michael C. Hall. I think he'd be amazing at that role. Andrew Scott as the Hobgoblin. Now, this is an interesting one because I'd like to see them bring the Hobgoblin. You could bring the Osborns, or hint at the Osborns, or Norman Osborn specifically. So you could explain that he's the creation of Oscorp. And I think Andrew Scott would be really good in that role. I've only seen him in Sherlock Holmes, the TV show, and he's a really good actor, and he's got such a sinister look to him. And that's the sort of thing you need for the Hobgoblin. And plus, it'd make a nice change to see someone different instead of always the Green Goblin. So I'd definitely go with Andrew Scott. I think he'd make a great Hobgoblin personally, and it'd be interesting to see that. Robert Pattinson as Morbius. Now, we all know that Robert Pattinson has his history of playing vampires, especially in the Twilight series, but I'd like to see him take that to the next level by casting him as Morbius. Now, what you could do is maybe you could show Michael Morbius in the film first before he changes, show him working with vampires, and then he could become Morbius maybe in the second half, or maybe at the end. And I think Robert Pattinson could really play an evil vampire. I mean, it's something I'd like to see him have a crack at. And also, you could bring in Blade. I mean, if you're going to bring vampires and you're going to take them down, and Blade's the man to do it. And I know they teamed up in the Spider-Man cartoons, but I'd love to see him do that on the big screen. I'm not sure who they could cast to play Blade. Maybe Wesley Snipes could do it again if he wanted to. But that's something I would definitely like to see, Blade and Spider-Man working together to take down Morbius. And, Robert Pattinson's got the chops to play a sinister vampire, so I'd definitely go with him. Mark Hamill as Dr. Octopus. Lots of rumours are going around that Mark Hamill might be appearing in the MCU. I did hear one rumour a couple weeks ago that he's interested in playing in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And I saw a fan-made picture of him as Dr. Octopus. Mark Hamill is a legend. The man's done it all. Star Wars, he's been the voice of the Joker in various different incarnations of Batman. He played the Trickster in the Flash TV show, and he played the Trickster again in the current take of the Flash TV show. So he's got a very impressive resume, but he's never played a villain on the big screen, and I'd love to see him do that. And I think he'd be really good at playing Dr. Octopus. He could really capture that over-the-top sort of personality that Doc Ock has. So I'd definitely like to see them cast Mark Hamill. He'd be perfect.